Welcome to the Storytelling with Data podcast, where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Simon.
Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. Now, during my time working in the corporate financial world, I encountered a fair number of management frameworks and leadership improvement programs. Now, I'm sure many of you might be skeptical of these, but I always try to take at least something away from each of them. Now, one particular phrase that I learned on one of these programs still resonates with me today, and that's structure liberates. Now, from the perspective of these leadership frameworks, this had the intention of ensuring that guidance and clarity were provided when setting goals and objectives and expectations, and giving this sense of framework allowed our line reports to flourish. But that phrase also relates nicely to corporate branding, logos, colors, fonts, slide templates that we often encounter within our businesses. And while these constraints can seem limiting at first, without the need to choose the aforementioned elements, we are free to concentrate on the content and the message we are looking to share. And while we normally have comprehensive guides for presentation design, I feel like the content within those slides, and more specifically, the data we choose to visualize, can be left to chance. And while it's great to allow a degree of creative flair, without a consistent set of guidelines, slides can end up looking inconsistent. And, if provided by multiple people, a collection of disparate elements. So if we look to embrace this structure liberates phrase and want to create a data visualization style guide, how do we go about doing that? Well, today it gives me great pleasure to introduce Maxine Graze to the podcast, who is an expert in designing both effective and aesthetically pleasing guides. Welcome, Maxine.
Hello. Thank you for having me on the podcast today.
Great to have you. And we had a really good pre-podcast conversation, didn't we, a couple of weeks back, maybe even a little bit longer ago than that, where we explored the various directions this conversation could take. And I know that we're going to get into some fascinating aspects around this particular topic during the course of today. Before we get on to that though, let's just take a moment to introduce yourself. Give us a sense of who you are, your journey to this place so far today.
So my official title is Senior Data Visualization Engineer, and I'm working at a company called King. So by day, I generally build dashboards, do data viz guidelines, I wear many different hats, do some design. And then outside of work, I play with data in more tangible ways like pottery and fermentation. And I like to turn things like fermentation ratios into physical objects or sound. And I know it might only sound tangentially related, but actually this mix of systems and human experience gives me a lot of product design. And so I get to play with this from different angles, and it just feeds back into my data viz process, I suppose. And so I mentioned that I do dashboards and data viz guidelines. And so actually I got into data viz guidelines about 4 years ago. And it was thanks to a Data Wrapper book club group. So Data Wrapper, I think most people are familiar. It's a platform often used by journalists to make data visualizations using UI. And so they often run these book clubs. And so we were reading Better Data Visualizations by Jonathan Schwabish. And the final chapter was out data viz style guides. And I was immediately drawn to this, and I just found it fascinating, this idea of process and branding and customization of data viz for organizations. And so I expressed interest in creating a working group. I got some people together. And so I've been meeting kind of on and off with Amy Cecil, Alan Wilson, and John Schwabish like every other week or so, sometimes once a month, to talk about data viz guidelines and also to make some useful free materials for that. So ever since then, I've been making data visualization guidelines for organizations I work with or doing some freelance as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I think there's certainly, when I reflect upon your bio there, Maxine, there's a lot of aspects that I can relate to there in terms of your passion for data visualization and how you got into it. Similar sort of thing for me, really, getting involved in a community in some shape or form for me and starting to get to know people within that, and that expands different horizons. I also say there's a few things there clearly over my head in terms of the way you use and the way you look to visualize information, the pottery aspect and the what was the main thing you mentioned there, the fermentation ratio. That's it. It's something that I'd love to hear a little bit more about, perhaps in a different conversation. That sounds very interesting indeed. One thing though is clear, is that you've clearly got a huge passion for this. It takes no inconsiderable effort, does it, to want to get involved outside of work and do all this, create this information, create these resources that you have for people. And I just love hearing about making data accessible, because we often say that numbers and data and facts and slides just aren't necessarily inherently interesting. And so I think that's where sometimes people can fall down by providing just information to their audiences without then considering how does it relate to them? How does it connect with them? How to create this emotional connection with that particular audience. So it's great to see that you're looking to almost provide this story behind.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. And if I quote from your website, you mentioned the website that you've created or co-created with Amy, Alan and John there, which is called datavizstyleguide.com, by the way. And I'll put the links to that in the show notes. It's a fantastic resource. I'm sure we'll get onto some of the aspects within it. But the heading of that particular website says, data visualization style guides are standards for formatting and designing representations of information like charts, graphs, tables, and diagrams. I think a pretty clear description there of what it's attempting to do. But if someone has never created a data visualization style guide before, perhaps you could walk through, well, just what one is and, well, why should we be doing this in the first place?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are familiar with design systems. I mean, like Adobe has a design system, IBM, those are pretty well known, I would say. And essentially, design system defines a brand. So a brand's website, you immediately know that it's that brand, like IBM, because there's typography, there's like a specific layout, there's specific color palette. And so for data visualization guidelines, the idea is to kind of take that brand identity and make it work with data visualization. So make sure that it's accessible, that it has specific constraints like you were talking about before with reporting templating, for example. Yeah, creating constraints so that you have a shared language, and whoever is designing or creating these data visualizations or even reports like don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. So it takes kind of the cognitive load off of the designer, so you can just like focus on the numbers and the storytelling. And it's also really important because like a design system, it reduces decision fatigue for creators and also makes onboarding a lot easier if you have some guidelines written out.
It's a really interesting point, and I think this goes back to the opening story, if you like, around this structure liberates and having that freedom. And if you work in this space, if you're an analyst and you're looking to design things, I guess it can feel a little bit restrictive at first, can't it? Oh, I've got to style my bar graph in this way, or I've got to label my axis in this certain font and color and style. But I think the more that we get around that and say, actually, those decisions have been taken away from me, but now I can concentrate more on, well, what data do I actually want to put into this bar graph, and what's the message with it, and how can we actually make change with it? Like you said there, it feels as though it gives you that extra element of freedom to then go on and help produce those things rather than spending time moving pixels or just changing increments of color here and there.
Yeah, you can really go into the weeds during design, like with spacing and especially with typography. Oh, and even more, especially with colors. And I mean, I've fallen down so many rabbit holes, and to just like have those guidelines done, I just feel like a breath of relief. I'm like, okay, those decisions are made. I don't have to revisit that anymore. I know that the color palette is accessible. I know when to use it. Great, let's do something else now.
I remember one particular instance of where I produced a pack and again gave it to my manager for feedback. And I wasn't really looking for feedback on some of the themes and the colors, although I had chosen many of those different colors that were in there. We didn't have a style guide as such in those days, and I really wanted feedback on the content, the words, rather than any of the design aspects. But all that they wanted to comment on was the cut and whether they were the most appropriate ones culturally, accessibility, all those various things. And it would have been great reflecting on that then to have had a style guide that was set, to almost say, no, there's colours are out of scope here. These are set. Really what I want you to help me with is the detail within it. But those things, I guess, in hindsight are always easier to say. And I feel like these things could take a number of forms and they could grow to be pretty extensive in terms of some of the things you've mentioned. Accessibility, you mentioned maybe reporting templates, also touched there upon maybe some of the formatting options you might have within the visualization. So I guess it's not something necessarily you can just sit down and create in a few hours, is it? What is the process or an ideal process, I guess, for designing one, creating one, and also I guess maybe iterating on one as well?
Yeah, iterating is very important. Well, I brought up design systems, and I like to approach it kind of from a product design angle. So product design, you have the design system, like I mentioned, buttons, cards, spacing, tokens, patterns. So a data viz guide is kind of like the same for data. So you'll have like the tokens are color, typography, spacing. Components could be like chart types. Patterns is like, how do we show time? How do we show uncertainty? And then also good product design uses a lot of UX processes. And so it's actually a lot like making dashboards, or at least in my experience making dashboards, you're starting with the user and you're asking like, what does the user want to see? Maybe doing some user interviews. And then when I'm doing dashboards, I'll create something. Maybe it's not perfect, but then I'm going to test it out with the user and they'll say, oh, yes, I like this. Oh, I'm still looking, like it was hard to find this information. Maybe make it more clear or maybe show this metric. And so making data viz guidelines is pretty similar structure to that, except that I would add a first step, which is auditing. And of course, like this depends where your organization is. But for example, if there's like already a lot of data visualizations, which is usually the case, you're going to start maybe by using a brainstorming tool, going through all of the data visualizations, putting them in this Miro document so that you can write some notes and everything. And then I would bring some stakeholders in and ask them about issues that they've encountered, pain points, and maybe say like, what'd you like about this one? What'd you not like about this data visualization? And then from there, we can kind of create a list of what are some issues or what are really the first points that need to be taken into consideration when making the data viz, because there isn't a size fits all, and it is very, very dependent on your organization's needs. So when working internally, you're usually blessed with more time, kind of like what you're saying. So I tend to do it incrementally. And so I might start with colors and typography because honestly, like it makes the biggest difference aesthetically. And it's the one, at least with colors, that like people have the most opinions. So it's good to get that hurdle out of the way and just like make everything accessible from the get-go. And then after that, I might zero in on or use, for an example, like dashboards. So if you use like a lot of monitoring dashboards, then I would just start with what is the layout for the board, what colors, what's the spacing, axes, etc. And I should note that I try to be as tool agnostic as possible. I mean, of course, the issue you run into is every tool has its constraints. And so it's important to like prototype in the tool that you use. But I mean, honestly, organizations are always changing, so are tools, and you might not be using the same tool that you started with. So it's good to not just make the guide in your tool, but also use other ones. So like at King, we use a React framework, but then we also use Excel and PowerPoint. So you need to make sure that the data visualizations, that guidelines that you make can be flexible and work in both tools, or preferably all tools as much as possible.
Yeah, tools is a great point, and a question that we commonly get around, have you created this particular makeover that we've perhaps shared with a client? And we always say, similar to yourself there, Maxine, we always say, well, it's been created in X tool, in this case, normally Excel or PowerPoint, but that's not really the point of it. We have to use a tool, and we use Excel because it's pretty prevalent across most organizations, but it's really the concepts that we're trying to demonstrate here. And in most tools, those concepts are freely available to achieve as well. And so it isn't about recommending a certain tool over another, as long as you keep those concepts at, I guess, high enough level that you can adapt them to whichever tool that you're using. So yeah, tools is certainly an interesting one.
And then afterwards, you can zero in and say, this is how you approach that with this tool. And that can be really helpful, but like maybe not start with the tool itself, because you're kind of getting into the nitty gritties there.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And you could always, like you say, drill deeper and go into more specifics if you know that the company is a Tableau company or a Power BI company. But again, like you say, if things change and tools get moved over, you don't want to limit yourself to being, you don't want to have to rewrite everything because everything's been created so specifically for one particular tool. So yeah, tools is a very interesting one. It was surprising to hear the amount of prep work that you consider doing going through this. I think it'd be very easy just to say, well, let's just get some bar charts and line charts and put them into a nice format, and this is the way we want to do the chart titles, and these are the colors we want to set ourselves. But I think what's really interesting for me is all the pre-conversations that you need to have. You mentioned here building a bit of a library, so you've got all the different visualization types gathered. And I guess for some companies that could be a huge amount of work, that preparation to get that collection of different visuals you've used or maybe have in the past. And then, of course, you've got the user interview. So you're looking at these different visualizations and almost having an assessment of whether what works here, what doesn't work. Is this a chart type that maybe that you're preconditioned to in some way? Is this a particular style? Is this color working for you? And all those different conversations you might have. And that's before you get on to maybe the specifics about what you might be building at that particular point in time. And you mentioned there dashboards. Of course, so much of what we do as analysts or producing data should be in this phase, should be in the understanding our audience and really getting to grips with what they are looking for. And oftentimes, isn't it, we think we might know what they're looking for, or our audience says they know what they're looking for, but until we really drill into that, we can't really get that clear sense. And so finding out from them exactly what they're looking for, and therefore what we can do to help create the data and create the outputs that help meet that need as well. So all of these preparation steps before we even get into building what the style guide might look like or deciding on what these different aspects are. And I really like the link there you mentioned, Maxine, with the product aspect as well. And because there are those overlaps, aren't they, with design, and the way you've just almost substituted the components for different chart types and various things there as well, I think is a nice way for people that might be interested in product design or other types of design, but can't quite see how they're related to the data viz side of things. In terms of feedback and this sort of collaboration, iterative process that you go through, I'm assuming here it's not just you go out to your stakeholders and gather their thoughts and then build the style guide and everything's done. So I'm guessing you're an advocate of this constant circular iteration process. Any thoughts or tips on how that can be successfully achieved?
Yeah, I would say that one of the biggest issues with data visualization style guides is keeping it alive and getting feedback.
Okay.
Especially if it's a guideline and it's not incorporated into a tool, because then you're demanding the user to go to a specific place. Whereas like if it was already incorporated into a tool, then they wouldn't have to worry about like picking a color or like manually setting all of these specifications. So I think, that is like a really, really important topic to talk about. So with the feedback, I mean, as I said, when I'm making it, like I try to get a lot of feedback. And the benefit of that is that each time you're reminding people about it. And then also you're incorporating them into the process. And so they have invested time, they have invested a lot of their skill into it. And so they're going to want to see it be successful or like perhaps use it because they're also familiar with it. So I think that that's very important, incorporating from the get-go. And then also using surveys and reviews. And we have like a survey that's just at the bottom of each dashboard so that people can anonymously say if there's any issues with it. And then we have like an overall survey link for the dashboards. And like, honestly, this doesn't get a lot of clicks, but it's helpful to have, especially if it's defined or if you remind people about it. But I think that more importantly is doing like biannual or annual surveys so that you're looking at who are my biggest users and coordinating some interviews with them and getting actual FaceTime so you can ask them questions and get proper responses and bug them about it. And so doing that, you're kind of going through the first user interview steps, like how easy is it to use this chart? How do you find like this metric? Or then also going to the designers and then like asking them about how much they follow the guide, if they think that it's helped the audience, etc. And then another one that's really good is just to always be on the lookout for reality checks in the wild, like opening up a PowerPoint or reporting and seeing if you can spot the same colors, typography, and chart patterns, because then you'll know if people followed it or not. And so then you try to take all of this feedback and fill in those holes of it, which is easier said than done.
And what do you do in that last instance there? What do you do if you're over someone's shoulder watching as they load it up and you see it's a completely different set of colors and typography? Or what, do you call it out? Do you give them some advice? Do you ask them, why have you not adopted the style guide that we've set up? How do you play things through there?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably ask them very softly or maybe say, hey, did you have this data visualization style guide? Because it's possible that they just don't know about it, especially if they're using a different tool. And that's also kind of an issue, is like, where do you put the style guide? And we have it on our dashboard homepage so anybody can see it. But again, if it's not incorporated into the system, there's still that extra step of going to find it and look at it. And that can be difficult. And so it's always like trying to figure out how can you make sure that the data visualization guide is the first step of making any sort of data visualization, especially if it's not incorporated into the tool.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. And I think I was gonna bring that one up in terms of if you've got it as a standalone document. I've seen many examples where it may be a PDF that's somewhere on a website, or it might be, let's say if it's a Tableau thing, it might be a separate Tableau workbook that's got all the style guide principles in it. But to your point there, Maxine, if it's not something that's embedded, so if maybe the colors aren't within the palette, or the fonts are accessible in the drop-down list, or even that there are brand packs. I know a number of tools create that apply all of those different aspects. It can be very easy to either forget or not know or just do something else. So yeah, you're right in terms of creating something that stands alone is useful as that sort of library reference document, but to embed it in the tool so you see it as you creating something, it is so much more powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. And usually you'll have both as well. And I was just thinking like it could be a fun developer trick or something, like before you're about to submit a data visualization or a dashboard, it's like, did you refer to this checklist to make sure that you followed all of the guidelines or something like that? And then there could be a link to it. But like one of the reasons why incorporating it into the tool still isn't going to replace the guideline is that guidelines should not include colors, typography, and these like hard-coded rules, but it should also be a flexible framework because it's guidelines. We're not calling them rules. And so there's going to be places where the designer is going to need to make their own decision. And so one of the like most obvious ones is that choosing a chart because I mean, when you're in a system, it's not going to tell you like always use a bar chart. Like you're not hopefully only using bar charts. So we talked about chart libraries. So that can be really useful, but even more useful than that is to have a chart library that is starting with a job kind of like in product design. And so it's like compare performance over time or rank categories, spot anomalies. There's a lot of types of problems that your organization comes up with, or I guess like questions that you're often trying to answer, because a lot of times the designers or like the people making the reports are not data visualization experts. So you kind of need to guide them through that process as well. And so having this kind of framework with jobs to be done, I think is really useful. And then within that, you can have your chart library and like, these are the charts that our organization uses to explain a comparison, for example. So you're kind of focusing on the pattern and then afterwards, hopefully showing how you can use it in the tool itself.
Yeah, a couple of really interesting points there. One, in terms of the blend between art and science. And I think people do crave a checklist, don't they? We hear that as a question that comes up a lot of times. What are the main do's? Or if I've got a chart, what are the things I need to make sure it's got in it? Or what are the things to avoid doing when creating a visualization? But to your point, these people are professionals in this space. They are analysts, the data scientists, and so they create data and visualizations for a living. So a lot of this is also down to their interpretation of what matters, what they're looking to show, the main insights they're looking to share. And so to restrict people too much is not going to play out too well. And all we're going to get is just, like you say, a series of bar charts without any real creative flair applied to anything. So that's an important point there, I think, that you mentioned. In terms of chart choices, again, I love that. And there is so many different charts out there nowadays and variations of a theme as well. And it can be a little bit overwhelming in terms of what chart should I use with this data that I have. So providing a guide and providing a series of options, if you have this type of data, then these are the sorts of things you might consider, I think is also a really good thing to include. We have a lesson in our workshop that's called choose an appropriate chart type, the key word being appropriate, and not necessarily choose the right or chart type, because, well, there isn't ever really that one size fits all. There's more often than not a range of different ways you could visualize the data. So again, providing that flexibility within the guidelines is crucial. We've touched upon what goes into a style guide. Let's expand on that a little bit further. We've talked about color, we've talked about typography, we've begun to talk a little bit about chart types. But if you're creating one for the first time, what are the key things to make sure you begin to look to include? Give us a run through your top style guide elements.
Yes, this is a big topic, and we are still trying to figure out what are the kind of core sections to be in a data visualization style guide. So we started this project where we are going through all of the data visualization style guides that are open source and that we've included on our website, and trying to see like what do they all share. Some issues when we were going through that, especially like how to define certain sections. And so we didn't 100% agree on them. And this is why we kind of bookmarked this to finish later. But I would still say that you're definitely going to have what we call like foundations. So color, typography, those would be the key ones. It's also hard to say, like, if you just have colors and typography, does that make a data visualization style guide? Yeah, still unsure about that. But hopefully you'll also have some accessibility basics. We think that's pretty important. But at the same time, like that can also be included into colors and typographies. So maybe some people think it's not necessary to say, but like one of the main issues in like defining what sections should be included is that it's really dependent on your organization. So, I mean, like on our website, we have some government data visualization style guides, and there's like journalists, like you mentioned, The Economist, and there's more private ones like Figma. And so all of them are going to have different needs and uses and like different layouts. Because if you're a journalist, like you might need to also have print layouts, and you'll have to think about like colors and printing and also the digital experience. And if you have kind of like customer facing data visualizations, maybe you're like a fintech company, then you're going to have interactions. So like maybe you're going to have to define how the user interacts with the data, or like tooltips, for example. So I think layouts, it's going to depend on the organization as well. And then you could maybe even get into like, I haven't seen this yet and we've been looking for it, but like VR, like maybe there has to be like data visualization style guides for your VR data visualizations.
I did see a VR demo. We had to, so a company came in and had some charts, and you had to put these goggles on, and you're allowed to float around these charts, like Matrix style, float around these charts to see things. It was an interesting concept. Not sure it's quite taken off yet, but it's certainly it's a fun one to think about, how we can be truly interactive with these things and get into the data rather than just seeing it in that 2D that we do typically today.
Yeah, I saw it also a few years ago and wasn't entirely convinced about it, but if I can't even imagine developing data visualization guidelines for that, as I mean, the user could, change their experience so much, and then you're also like dealing with a physical area. So not going to go into that, but like maybe your organization will need to, and then good luck solving that problem. Let's see. And then, so I also mentioned like a chart library is often included, but not very helpful though. And then I have to say one thing that is underrated, and I don't even think I've seen in data visualization, is like process and governance. And so like, how do new patterns or like charts get added? Or how do you request a review? And also big one, like how to handle expectations. Because we mentioned that all of this is about building constraints, but like keeping a flexible system. And so you're going to have expectations, and maybe talking a little bit about ones that have popped up or like who to go to would be very helpful.
I like that one at the end there. And that circles back a little bit, doesn't it, to that iterative process and getting feedback and understanding how people are feeling towards anything that has been set up. It's also quite reassuring, because I imagine many people listening might be thinking, where do I start with this? There's so much to potentially consider. But it seems to me that if we can tick off the fundamentals of good color choices and typography that's understandable, legible, accessible, all those sorts of things, but also links nicely into the brand perhaps, or if we're doing it personally as something that we feel represents us as individuals, ensuring that things are accessible both across color and font. And then maybe something around the chart choices and the way we might design a typical bar chart, line chart, the way we might style things within those. That feels as though we're getting into a pretty good place already, notwithstanding that there could be company differences. And like you say, there's certain aspects that will be added on depending on the types of visualizations that people do. But it feels as though it's something that can be achieved rather than this thing that just is too much and is not possible because there's a huge amount of content, huge amount of different things to add into it. When we think about things like color and typography, what are your top tips, Maxine, on choosing colors potentially? And of course, again, there'll be brand colors that are set, but is there anything that you would say around color, around typography, that are the key do's and don'ts, if you like?
Ooh, I would say do not fall down a rabbit hole and spend too much time obsessing over it. And definitely start with the brand guidelines. So what I often do is I'll take those colors and then just like change them a little bit to make them accessible. I'll use some color contrast tools. Yeah, there's quite a lot of good ones out there. And then also figure out how many colors you need. So unfortunately, like we had some dashboards that I think had like 15 colors. And I was like, this is bad practice overall. So like this should even exist. But we generally say like limit it to between like 5 and 7. And I don't think that was like ever proved. I remember John Schwabish and I were looking into this at one point, but it's mostly like about how much you can remember at one point. And I also think that like after 7, it's really hard to find aesthetically pleasing colors that are also accessible. So generally what I've done is I've created 7 that I've spent a lot of time with, and then I'll have a like extendable palette, and then those will be colors that, in my opinion, like are not very aesthetically pleasing with the other color palette. And so it'll be kind of like use this or don't use this. Yeah, use this at your own discretion. But don't try to spend too long on them. Just make sure that they're accessible, and then also just iterate on it. Yeah, that's all.
So Matt, yeah, to summarize there, then we want to make sure that we are sticking with anything that's been set by brand, by marketing. We want to make sure that our colors are maybe on the smaller side within our palette. So we haven't got 8, 9, 10 different colors that we're looking to use. Perhaps maybe 5, 4 would work as a good starting point. Make sure those colors are accessible, use them appropriately, culturally if we can as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it's nice to see and hear that we're not trying to overcomplicate things with this. It is helping people by providing that initial starting point, but still giving people that flexibility as well within it. What about fonts, Maxine? Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, fonts, you also might be able to get away with using the brand font for titles, and then maybe choosing a font that's good with numbers, for example. And fonts is generally a lot easier than colors, I would say. Because like with colors, like you might still need to use the guidelines. Like it might not necessarily be 100% encoded into your tool. Kind of like what you're saying, if there are culturally specific or like organizational specific metrics that you want to use, like maybe for the same metric, you use the same color over and over. So that's also something I want to mention that should be included in the guideline. Or having a gray color palette, like for other, is also something that people forget about. But like, yeah, if you're using the same metrics over and over, then those might need to have their own colors. And whereas typography is, yeah, a lot more straightforward. I mean, you're still going to have like a hierarchy of type, but luckily there's like systems out there and you can kind of just like see what they've done. Again, iterate and see if it makes sense for your dashboards or reporting.
Yeah, gaining inspiration from elsewhere is always a fantastic starting point, whether that's different style guides that are available. And again, by the way, on the website that you've mentioned it a couple of times before, and I will again put the link in the show notes, there's a number of different resources that people can check out for inspiration and see how other companies have created their own style guides. So check those out. And then when it comes to charts, and you mentioned the chart library, have you got any personal preferences, Maxine, with how you might begin to style charts? So for example, here at Storytelling with Data, we will typically advocate chart titles, for example, being in the top left, because without any other visual cues, that's typically where we start to read things, in that top left, and then scan over and zigzag our way down. So is there any tips that you've seen from experience within chart creation itself that you would align different elements or place aspects that seem to work well?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I have to say I generally follow Storytelling with Data's guidelines.
Oh,
I think that they're, yeah, very clear. So I incorporate those. But again, like it depends on your organization. So there isn't a one size fits all in that. Like maybe you need sources and notes, but if you're journalism, but we don't need only, on our dashboards, we need to have an icon so that the user can directly get the Excel sheet or like see the table. So it just depends. And when you have all the components, it's up to you, the designer, to figure out where they're going to be located on your chart, and then to tell the user how to duplicate what you have done.
And that's where it cycles back, doesn't it, to the conversations that have been had. I mean, building up that chart library aspect that you talked about right at the beginning there, that audit phase of development of this, you get a sense of, first of all, where things are currently being done. You get a sense of whether or not those are working, and that then would lead naturally on to, do we want to change this if it's not working, or do we want to keep it if it is working? And so, like you say, chart titles don't need to be in the top left. We put them there because we feel as though it's a good place to do. But if people have a particular need to have them center aligned, for example, then again, like we've already mentioned, there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do this thing. It's just making sure it's consistent. And so when we see a chart in our organization, we know it's been created and it conforms to those guidelines that have been set.
Exactly.
We've talked about a lot of what to do and some of the aspects within the chart and visualization style guides more generally. What are the typical mistakes, though, Maxine, that you see come up? I'm sure you must have seen a number of different style guides that have been created. Where do people maybe go a little bit wrong when building these out?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely made a lot of mistakes myself. And this is going to be a reiteration of what I've said, like for best practices. But I have to say the biggest one is not involving stakeholders early on. If you don't involve stakeholders early on, then you're just creating a guideline that's going to sit somewhere and never be used. And this has happened like tragically in the past with like big organizations, just because like people are not, I mean, they're not in on the decision making, even though they're the users. And so I think that it's not in their the front of their mind. And if they haven't given feedback, then it probably doesn't feel like it's for them. And so they're going to be less inclined to use it. And so include stakeholders early on. Another one would be like creating a 100-page PDF with also that's like just text and no search or examples. It should be visual and kind of to the point. That's also why I like to have checklists, because like each time, even if you've read the guide, like each time you're probably not going to want to spend time looking through it, but like maybe have a interactive checklist where you're just like focusing on 80, not 100%, because like we're never going to be perfect here. And then having some way that the user can like easily find something if they need to refresh their information. Let's see, another one could maybe be over focusing on aesthetics and over like tiny color differences and kind of what I just said, like leaving out big UX questions or like use cases and audience. So yeah, keep it alive and keep getting feedback.
It's amazing, isn't it, how often our answers regarding a number of different aspects, whether it's just building a chart for the first time, whether it's understanding why we're communicating in the first place, go back to those conversations with our stakeholders. Why are you looking for this? What are you looking to achieve? Is this helping?
Yeah.
Is this going to solve a particular problem for you? All those different things. If we can get the answers to those initially, whether that be if we're creating a presentation, whether it be if we're creating a data viz style guide, understanding and getting that engagement from those stakeholders is so important, because if we don't, whether it's a style guide that's been built, whether it's a dashboard that's been created, whether it's a particular recommendation we're looking to make, there's a good chance they won't be as successful, will they, without that buy-in, without that support from the people that have initially requested it, I guess, in the first place.
Yeah, keep that conversation and the process going.
So if we think about teams that maybe, or individuals that don't have style guides currently, maybe small organizations or new organizations perhaps, or maybe just even individuals that are looking to create something for their own personal brand, what's the first step? What's one that we talked about conversations with stakeholders, but let's say we've got all of that together. Where do we go? Do we need to prototype things? Do we need to just get into our tool? Any recommendations you might make on that first initial step of how do I start to create this style guide?
Yeah, maybe not jump into the tool just yet, but if you've decided you need a data visualization style guide and talk to the stakeholders, then afterwards just find like maybe 2 places that would make the difference. So those could be like color and typography, and then pick a use case for it. So maybe reporting, because you use a lot of reports, and then just focus like on bar chart and reporting and make that, and then kind of build it up from there.
I love that, because again, it just feels as though it's achievable, doesn't it? We're not trying to change the world in one go. It's a little bit of a change, but within a certain area, like you say, reporting, I think that's a great place to start. But also, even within that, we're not necessarily changing all the chart types in one go. We're just having a look at color or font, and we're not looking to change everything. It is just that incremental steps. And of course, with those incremental steps, we can get that quality feedback, and we haven't committed or invested so much time with something that perhaps doesn't work. Even though we've had conversations, even though we've thought and planned things out, in the real world, if we presented something and it still doesn't quite fit the bill, well, we can take a step back and revise, rather than having invested all that time to create something that just doesn't fit the scope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then get other people, other designers to use your guideline and recreate what you've created. That's a big one. Make sure it works.
Yeah, for sure. Brilliant. Well, we're coming to the end, Maxine, of the podcast. Thank you very much for everything that you've shared with us today. I hope that people listening will have a better idea of what a data visualization style guide is, more clue on how to create one, and also maybe allay some of the nervousness, the caution around, well, where do I start with potentially such a big thing? And there are some small steps that can be taken to begin to build this up without investing huge amounts of time. Any final thoughts and reflections from your experience, Maxine, in creating these style guides that you want to share with the audience today?
To summarize it, make sure you need one, make it tool agnostic, and it's a process. Include people early on and all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize. And yeah, make sure you need one. Probably the best advice there, because there's no point spending a huge amount of time creating something that just isn't quite needed at that particular moment.
Absolutely.
So, Maxine, again, a huge thank you for taking the time to join us here today on the podcast. It's been a hugely enjoyable conversation. I've certainly learned a lot. And we'll take some of the advice, I think, into my future visualization work. So thank you for that. Again, I will just reference the website there, datavizstyleguide.com. A fantastic resource if you are looking for inspiration or looking to see how style guides across a myriad of different companies are put together. To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much for listening. And until next time, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.